By popular demand, I'm going to be basically showing you guys my process for unpacking and exploring mystery diseases. I've already got a couple of threads that I've explored, so I'm just going to show you the process so that you kind of understand it. But then the second half of the video, I'm going to actually like do one cold, so you can actually see me learning in real time. The whole point of this is to demonstrate, one, what I have already learned, like what I have empirically learned and how it has helped, and that'll go pretty quickly. And then I will show you the process of how I go about learning. So learning how to learn. Basically, what some of you said is like, teach a man to fish. So I ran this poll just to kind of figure out what you guys want to figure out, and IBS or similar gut disease was very high because I often, when I talk about burnout, a lot of people want to know, like, can you tell me how to fix my IBS or Crohn's disease? Cancer, endocrine, and other metabolic disorder was neck and neck. Depression, autoimmune, ADHD, autoimmune. So lots and lots of people want to cover autoimmune disease. So we will be covering autoimmune disease today. So it's pretty close. Technically, autoimmune is not an endocrine. It's an immune disorder. IBS is closer, but still, by popular demand, that's what we'll be covering. So now you've got some context. So let's jump in. Let me give you a little bit of context for this one. So I've mentioned repeatedly that I'm recovering from burnout. Today will be my first day of exercise in almost 12 weeks, about 10 and a half, 11 weeks. So I'm going to go do 5 minutes of rowing in just a little while. So reconditioning is difficult. So I've been supporting several friends. I also have a burnout community. So where I help people. Sorry, I've got like a dog hair in my eye. And also, if I start coughing again, we're still in peak allergy season. Yay, go me. I'm a hot mess. Anyways, so I have a burnout community where I'm guiding people through my same process, and everyone's diagnosis is going to be different. And so I have this friend who's also going through burnout, but their genesis was very different. And so they basically texted me just saying, like, I have all these new symptoms. I had a doctor turn me away. And like, when you have a mystery diagnosis, this is one of the things that a lot of people were saying is like, no, like, we don't know what's wrong. Like, if you don't assume that you have a diagnosis. So that's why we're starting here. So like, I have all these problems. Doctors are turning me away. They're saying I'm not getting better. It's like that. Nothing feels worse than a doctor who confidently says, we will fix you. And then they say, I don't know what's wrong. And then they say, go away. Particularly in America, doctors have this ego where if they don't know, they either will punt you, they'll shuffle you off and write a referral to someone who will just say, why did they send you to me? Or they'll say, it must just be all in your head. Those are kind of the two default reactions for American doctors. None of them can say, I don't know, we need to investigate. They say, this isn't my problem, or you're making it up. So we're not bitter at all here. Anyways, so I just started a new chat, and I just said, I have a friend who's in a similar state as me. I put this in my personal burnout project. And so I was just like, all right, this is what they're going through. Stuff like Lyme disease, they thought was maybe a trigger, but then the only definitive thing I know is that they had COVID a while ago. And then I don't remember if they tanked before or after the COVID, but it certainly has gotten worse since then. So the symptoms that they texted me were POTS, so serious POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So basically that means when you stand up, your heart starts racing. Palpitations and AFib, although I'm not sure if that's actually diagnosed or just how it feels. Severe PEM, so PEM is post-exertional malaise. That's basically if you do too much work of any kind, then the next day you can't move, which is also similar to stuff like fibromyalgia. Then brain fog and blue fingers. Randomly, circulation seems to be stopping. Contraindicators, pulse ox is normal, EKG is normal. So basically every time they went to the ER, doctor said, looks fine to me, go home, right? All right, so then the next thing I did, so let me just unpack what I did here. So I gave just kind of a high-level summary of what's the medical history, what's the timeline, what are the most acute symptoms, and what are things that were even if it's normal, it's still probative, because looking at what's normal versus what's not normal, that contrast is really helpful for human doctors, but it's also helpful for the AI. And so then what I did, I said, there's a lot more information, but please ask me the top 10 questions about her history, and I will answer best that I can. So the reason that you do this is because even the latest chatbots will not instinctively ask a bunch of clarifying questions. They'll do the best that they can to just figure it out. And so this is a feature that hasn't been trained in. I don't know why it hasn't been trained in. But anyway, so if you tell it, say, ask me the top 10 questions. So it's like timeline and triggers, orthostatic data, cardiac workup, exertion parameters, sleep architecture, autonomic and vascular systems, GI nutritional status, endocrine and metabolic markers, inflammatory autoimmune screen, and exposures, med, and supplements. So I answered all of that. I'm not going to bore you to death. So I just said, okay, cool. I'll do the best that I can. And then it thought for 38 seconds, did 10 searches. I wonder if it did any searches for the first one. It did not do any searches for the first one. It said, working hypothesis, a post-viral autonomic crash, COVID-triggered POTS plus small fiber autonomic neuropathy with overlap into ME/CFS-style post-exertional malaise and HPA axis dysregulation. The blue fingers, hot flashes without sweat, severe orthostatic intolerance point to dysregulated vasomotor and pseudomotor control rather than a primary oxygen delivery problem. Normal pulse ox and EKG merely rule out hypoxemia and gross conduction defects. They don't touch autonomic layer. This cluster is now well described in the long COVID literature and responds best to cardiology, neurology-led autonomic workups, plus careful pacing and volume support measures. So basically, just giving all the information that I gave it was just a little bit of history, the most acute symptoms, and then I answered some of this stuff just best that I could. I said, I know this is thin, but what are you thinking? What's the most salient medical direction? I wasn't expecting a diagnosis. And by the way, this is not medical advice. This is just like, if you don't know what the hell's going on, like this might help point you in the right direction. So then it said like post-viral autonomic crash, and so it's like we start going in this direction. So then there's all kinds of other ways to test it. And long story short, so I sent it along. We found some resources. I said, like, okay, this is the state that they live in. Can you help find some reputable specialists that we can go to? Like, and then I asked for a PDF. Like, can you just print out a PDF that she can just take and hand to the intake nurse that will explain the timeline and the symptoms and why we think that this is the correct direction. So again, this is not a replacement for medical care. This is to help you get the correct medical care. So post-COVID, autonomic crash, I didn't know it could happen like this. I mean, I knew that like long COVID could cause CFS, but I thought that it was more like respiratory and metabolic, oh, you're not getting enough oxygen. So that's where post-COVID. But no, this basically, the working hypothesis is that the COVID actually fried the small nerve fibers, which sounds awful. But if all the wiring is cut in your nervous system, no wonder you can't tolerate anything. So that's the working hypothesis there. So I just wanted to share this as, basically in two messages, we zeroed it in just by having comprehensive information about symptoms and then telling it to ask questions. Ask me questions to clarify. So that's number one. Number two, this was interesting. So this actually ties to anxiety and depression. So I have been completely transparent about the fact that I'm recovering from burnout. I've gone to psychedelic ceremonies. Actually, interestingly enough, my wife went back, and one of you in the audience went to the same retreat that my wife was at, and she's like, "Wait, Dave?" Apparently, he and my wife got along fantastically, and they're both into music, so they've been yakking about music ever since. So they've been like BFFs. So, anyways, whoever it was out there in the audience that went to the retreat with my wife, I'm glad you had fun. Anyways, so. Yesterday, I totally did not mean to stay up late talking to ChatGPT 03 about dreams and psychedelics. But randomly on the yesterday, I just had like random dreams come up. One of them was from more than 5 years ago. It's really, really rare to remember a dream from that long ago. So I was just like, what's going on here? Oh, and by the way, this is relevant to ADHD, anxiety, and depression. So I just said, what the heck is going on? Where I had these dreams pop up randomly as I'm just laying on the couch resting. And long story short, this part was just like, it's just normal. It's just normal when you feel safe and your brain has nothing that it's doing. It's just, random traces are like hippocampal traces are gonna pop up. So it could have been, something else was on your mind that reminded your brain of this other pattern, and it's just like, oh hi, here's a dream that you had a while ago. Is it relevant? I don't know. It's not entirely random. Memory is primarily associative, and there's all kinds of other stuff. I studied this extensively for cognitive architecture, so none of that was particularly surprising. Default mode exploration and associative pattern completion. So it looks for salience and novelty or utility. So those are kind of the three things that your brain is looking for when it's scavenging memories. It's like, okay, is something new and valuable, or is it salient to your current context, or what? So cognitive scavenging is a good metaphor when you're bored. Now, if you have anxiety or depression, so this is what we get into. If you have anxiety or depression, by the way, this is not medical advice. This is just my best guess, my best understanding. When you have anxiety or depression, basically one of the cognitive component of that is when you get into an idle state, when your default mode network flares up, because overactive DMN is associated with everything from anxiety, depression, negative rumination, those sorts of things. Basically, there's a lot of leftover packets, is one of the words that it used, that it starts scavenging. And it's like, oh, hey, you're physically safe enough. There's some old psychological material that we need to process. Here you go, boss. And so then you start feeling worse and worse and worse. So this is why a lot of people with anxiety, depression, or ADHD keep the focus on the outside. They have to stay constantly busy, lest their attention turn inwards, and then all that other stuff comes up. I have a friend, an ex-girlfriend, who's like that, who keeps her social calendar full 6 days a week so that she doesn't have to be by herself and think. Because if that happens, then all the bad stuff comes up. So the key is processing it. So we talked about, there's weighting. This is what came up a lot, is weighted priors. So basically, these are the associations that your brain makes between, a particular sensation, a thought, a memory, and some of those older materials that then hijack. They do limbic system hijacking. They activate your amygdala. So that's why you can just be anxious. You can just sit there and just a thought comes up, and now suddenly you're anxious. You can deprogram that. There's a book called Rewire Your Anxious Brain. Read it and practice it. It took me about 2 years to deprogram my anxiety, but now it's like mostly gone. What I will also say, though, is that there is a physiological component to all of this. If your guts are inflamed, you will be anxious and depressed. It doesn't matter if you've done the psychological work. Mind and body, they are separate systems, but they're interlinked systems. So you need to do the psychological work as well as the physical healing work. Ask me how I know. Yeah, so this conversation went on for a long time. But TLDR, basically what we knew, psychedelics blast all those connections apart and they give you a rewiring window. The rewiring window for stuff like anxiety and depression and PTSD is actually a lot bigger than I thought that it was. So some of this is just the latest research, where the acute effects of psychedelics are like, they last hours, right? But then there are like BDNF, so that's brain-derived neurotropic factor, that stays elevated for like a week, depending on what you do. But then there's a whole cascade of changes, so you actually have several phases of integration work. Anyways, this is all for my other channel, and long story short is the end. So the very, very like bottom line is that there's like 3 or 4 gates that you need to overcome in order to have an integrative experience, and you don't need psychedelics. Actually, here, let me see if I can find it. Locks. Okay, yeah. So there are 4 locks that basically have to happen in order for integration to happen. And integration is the goal, because once you integrate something psychological, then it will no longer bother you. It's been fully assimilated. So this is specifically for anything that causes fear, shame, anything that you couldn't cope with at the time. So that can be everything from childhood trauma, bullying. It can be adult trauma as well. So the 4 ingredients are: number 1, overall system readiness. So this is all the subcortical detections that basically say, I am safe right now. I am physically healthy, physically safe, and ready for an intense experience. The reason is because, 1, if you don't feel safe, your brain is just going to put all the trauma on the back burner. Those are the mental firewalls that we're talking about. So you need to be in a place where you're ready. And also, it can be very energetically expensive. Your brain rewiring itself, lo and behold, actually consumes a lot more oxygen and requires a lot more mitochondrial support and those sorts of things. So if you're running at a deficit, if you're exhausted and hungry and tired and you don't feel safe, you can't do this work. Next is you need a hippocampal trace. So the hippocampal trace is the reminder. This is the cue. This is either a thought, a memory, a word, a sensation, something that brings you back to that original trigger. And this is why you see like the stereotype is like, lie down on the couch and tell me about your mother, like the Freudian and Jungian stuff. The idea there is is that through conversation and through bringing up those narrative memories, you can reconnect with a depressive or anxiety-inducing episode. Now, what was really interesting that we discovered during this conversation is that those firewalls it's actually true. And your brain will actually create a partition between the narrative memory and the affective memory, meaning you can remember what happened and you can recall it in clinical terms, but you're not feeling it. And so the idea then is you have to recall both the narrative side and then you have to feel it. And so this is why techniques like somatic experiencing and psychodramas can actually work, because you drop back into that memory, not just the narrative memory, but the affective memory. So you remember how afraid you were or how sad you were. And that's where you get the amygdala engagement, because just the hippocampal trace on its own will be the narrative recall. The amygdala engagement is the affective recall, the affective recall. And so then what happens is you get to the point of cortical inhibition. So that's where your upper brain says, okay, let's, we're all back in the octagon, go. Right. And so then exactly what I said here, psychodrama or somatic experiences can bridge that connection sufficiently to create an integration window. When all of those are true, you have a couple hours to do integration, which is you can do it under the care of a therapist. You can do it under the care of psychedelics. But this also is why psychedelics can be traumatizing, is because it literally will bring you back narratively and physiologically to a traumatic experience. And if it's not well handled, it can re-traumatize you, or it can magnify the trauma, or neutral is that it doesn't do anything. Worst case is that it makes it worse. Best case is it gives you a chance to integrate everything. So that's anxiety and depression. Again, not medical advice. There is so much information here. If you guys want, let me know in the comments. I can figure out a way to post the entire conversation somewhere. I don't think this one is particularly personal. Like, it's nothing that you guys don't already know. I talk about it either on this channel or my psychedelics channel. So let me know if you find it interesting. All right, now, therefore, let's go and do a new one. So this one, we're going to try it O4 Mini High. I noticed that O4 Mini High tends to do more internet researches. It takes a little bit longer, so we're gonna do a book report on IBS and other inflammatory diseases. So that the model doesn't get tripped up, I'm just gonna say I am doing a book report, thesis, doctorate. Actually, I'm just gonna say doctorate on inflammatory diseases, namely looking for universal patterns. My goal is to create a new model of inflammatory inflammatory chronic disease, such as, let's do IBS, Crohn's, fibromyalgia, and lupus. These are basically the 4 that came up the most. Did I misspell Crohn's? I thought it was Crohn's disease. Oh, is it Crohn's? You're kidding me, right? It's Croahns. Anyways, the model will figure it out. Pardon my spelling if I spelled it wrong, but I think that it's just not in my browser's dictionary. I'm just getting started, so let's see what we can figure out. All right, so while this is thinking, I'm going to explain why I worded it the way that I did. What we can figure out. Okay, so first, by I should have removed book. By saying that I'm an academic, I'm just studying this. This is going to bypass its tendency to say you need to go to a doctor. But this is a legitimate academic query. And so it's not gonna say like, what are your symptoms? Because even sometimes when I'm asking for someone else, it assumes that the symptoms I'm talking about are mine. I'm like, no, it's not me. I'm asking for a friend, literally. In this case, if you are asking about IBS, Crohn's, fibromyalgia, and lupus, you're probably not asking for yourself. And if you are suffering from all of those, God help you. I am sorry. Okay, so your ambition to distill a unifying framework for conditions as disparate manifestation as IBS, Crohn's, fibromyalgia is exactly the kind of synthesis our field desperately needs. So yeah, like I have a actually no, I think O4 Mini does not use styles because I basically said like be as clinical as like Spock and Data. Anyways, begin by conceiving chronic inflammation as a system of interlocking modules. The barrier module. Immune regulatory module, neuroendocrine sensory module, microbial ecosystem, and the epigenetic genetic substrate. In health, these modules exchange signals in a series of checks and balances. The epithelial barrier contains microbial and dietary antigens. Innate and adaptive immune cells patrol for threats. HPA axis and autonomic nervous system modulate the intensity and duration of inflammation. Commensal microbes educate and restrain immune responses, so on and so forth. Crohn's disease and IBS, barrier integrity in the gut is compromised, whether through an IL-23 Th17 driven breach of tight junctures, so basically leaky gut, or stress-induced zonulin release, also leaky gut. Now, this is not fair because I happen to already know a lot of this. My stepmom has had fibromyalgia and lupus for many, many years. I've been working on burnout, which has a lot of similar pathophysiology, yada, yada, yada. In fibromyalgia, by contrast, the barrier in question is the blood-brain and dorsal root ganglion interfaces. Microglia activation and loss of inhibitory interneurons turn innocuous peripheral signals into pain. Okay, yeah, that's why fibromyalgia hurts. So it's similar to a neuropathy model. I know that's not perfect, but I'm also not a neurologist. Lupus reveals yet another facet: clearance mechanisms for apoptotic debris fail. So nucleic acids chronically engage on plasmacytoid dendritic cells, driving a systemic type 1 interferon signature. That sounds like some technobabble right now. Sir, there's a type 1 interferon signature. Okay. Data, shut up. All right. Wesley, get off the bridge. All right. Despite the tissue-specific doorways, all 4 conditions converge on a handful of common mediators. I thought so. TNF alpha, IL-6, IL-1 beta serve, I think that's beta, I'm not sure what that means, serve as master alarms. Their sustained elevation rewires the very architecture of lymphoid and stromal tissues, imprints maladaptive memory in macrophages, and shifts HPA axis towards maladaptive feed-forward loop. So I actually directly asked OpenAI, I was like, can you do a feature where I can just highlight something and just have a sidebar, like explain what the hell you just said to me so that I don't have to put it into another chat? And actually then, on that Twitter thread, a bunch of people said, oh my God, yes, please. Because I usually have to have a second Claude session explaining this because I don't want to interrupt the main thing. Oh, this also underscores one of the best ways to use these models is don't treat it like chat, treat it like email. So I just emailed an advisor, and my expert advisor took an hour to write this and said, "Oh yes, here you go, sonny boy." So instead of reading it like a chat message, I'm reading it like an email from a world-leading expert. All right, so coming back down, a lot of this you're probably going to feel lost. That's fine. Part of learning these new domains, like if you're understanding a new disease model, whether you're trying to overcome insomnia, actually that would have been a good one because insomnia has so many potential causes. So if you're trying to overcome depression, anxiety, insomnia, these other chronic diseases, one of the number one things is to understand you will get a PhD in this disease. Whatever your disease happens to be, you need to become a world-leading expert in it. And it sucks. It sucks that that's the way that the world works. But guess what? You've got a superpower you've got a superhero on your side in the form of these AIs. Okay. Next, genetic and epigenetic factors set your gain knobs for these mediators. Shared HLA haplotypes, DR2 and DR3 predispose both Crohn's and lupus to lose self-tolerance. Interesting. So we're already seeing some overlap here. And you see how it's citing things as we go? So PMC, Wikipedia. Meanwhile, early life stressors or infections can leave durable methylation marks on cytokine promoters. This actually strikes me as very important. Early life stressors, that could be high ACE scores, that could be critical illness when you're young, that could be chronic complex PTSD from either growing up poor or in a problematic home. So basically, durable methylation marks on cytokine promoters. Cytokine storms are what cause inflammatory overload, tilting the balance ever so slightly towards pro-inflammation. So there you go, simple enough. Microbiome finally acts as a crucial rheostat. Short-chain fatty acids promote regulatory T cells, whereas dysbiosis unleashes pathobionts. That's cool, I haven't seen that word before. That directly engage pattern recognition receptors. TLDR, your body is highly, highly predisposed to inflammatory responses. What's emerging to me is that at least in the case of Crohn's and lupus, your body is predisposed to inflammatory responses. It's just a matter of which tissues get attacked or what the specific downstream manifestation is. What emerges is a dynamic network. Barrier breach begets antigenic overload. Antigenic overload spins up inflammatory mediators. Inflammatory mediators remodel neural and endocrine circuits. Those circuits feed back into barrier function and immune set points. So this is really important because a set point is basically the default that your body is trying to get to. But if your set points are too high, then your body is trying to default to too sensitive. And all of it is modulated by one's genetic and microbial context. You can't change your genes, but you can change your microbiome. So we'll get into that later. I have a hypothesis. Chronicity is not a single broken cog, but a network having crossed a critical threshold so that its negative feedback breaks no longer engage. This is exactly what burnout is. So this is basically, in the case of burnout, it's when you get to a state of what's called decompensation or allostatic overload, where you basically put yourself into this kind of situation, even though you're not necessarily genetically predisposed to it, your body just can't keep up with the healing. Your next step might be to test this network model against patient data. I recommend assembling multi-omic data sets, cytokine panels, microbiome profiles, methylation maps, so on and so forth. Okay, cool. All right. I have a few working hypotheses already. Number one, microbiome seems critical here. It came up multiple times, and certainly many people swear by taking care of the guts. This is a shout out to the people in the comments who talked about elimination diets. Everything from probiotics to elimination diets to high fiber diets. High fiber diets have been indicated to at least ameliorate symptoms across all four pathologies, if not help push patients into full remission, often with multiple interventions. So I'd like to explore the centrality of the GI tract, and in particular, the microbiome and its constituents, as a potential unifying framework. That's not to say that genetics is not central. However, it does seem to me that the common factor that we all have control over is what we eat and how we condition the microbiome. I suspect those levers are clinically understudied. And so that's one. The next thing is I'd like to also explore cohort level studies regarding origination. Early life stressors such as CPTSD, high ACE scores, critical illness, poverty, etc. Those all seem to be common factors, not always, but I'm curious if this cluster of investigations could reveal maybe underlying predispositions that are not strictly genetic, aka environmental risk factors, and what can be done about them, such as perhaps meditation, yoga, various forms of therapeutic interventions, and so on. And I'm adding this in because it was mentioned a couple of times, but it's also been my observation that oftentimes people with autoimmune disease have had struggles. And sometimes it's like cart or the horse kind of problem. The struggles often start very young. But yeah, so can you look these up for me? All right, so while it's thinking, we'll see how many sources it gets. Like I said, 04 mini high usually gets more sources. The first one was 5 sources, so that's not bad. We'll see what it does this time around. Yeah, so again, I have an unfair advantage, so I know what I'm looking for here a little bit. But for those of you that have struggled with some of these conditions for a long time, you probably know a little bit about what you're looking for as well. So the framing basically is, I want to get a PhD in this. That's literally the framing that I used. If you have chronic disease or severe disease, it's the PhD that you never wanted. So by basically saying, I'm doing a doctorate on inflammatory disease. Cool. If I were to start this over, I'd say, I'm doing a doctorate on burnout. Let's explore burnout. It says, your instincts are well-founded. There is now mounting evidence the gut microbiome sits at the very nexus of seemingly disparate chronic inflammatory diseases. I already knew that. And that early life stressors imprint long-term vulnerability in that same network. Below, I sketched what the literature tells us so far with an eye towards where you might probe next. The GI tract's microbial system acts as a master regulator of mucosal barrier function and systemic immunity, and even neural sensitization. Yes, I knew that too. One of the reasons that burnout hurts so much is because your entire body turns up the pain signals. Basically, I felt like I had fibromyalgia. So I checked. I didn't have all the symptoms, but I was darn close. In IBS randomized trials of high fiber diets and low FODMAP diets, FODMAP elimination, both boost short-chain fatty acid production and restore a healthier microbial balance, translating into reduced pain and bloating. Crohn's patients given specific probiotic strains show significant drops in CRP and ESR. CRP and ESR are two of the best indicators of system-wide inflammation, improved histology scores, and delayed time to relapse compared with placebo. Fibromyalgia sufferers placed on multidisciplinary nutritional chronobiology programs, good Lord, that's a mouthful, combining targeted dietary adjustments with optimized meal timing, demonstrate meaningful reductions in widespread pain and fatigue. Okay, so meal timing. The reason that this is important is because of circadian rhythms. Your HPA axis is going to be producing cortisol at specific times, but also your body learns to adapt to those times, meaning what happens if you eat at the same exact time every day, the same exact amount every day, your body says, all right, I'm ready for it. This was actually really important for me in recovering from burnout. Was one of the major breakthroughs that I had as I started eating the same breakfast at 8 o'clock every day. And that was like, that unlocked so much energy. I'm like, why do I feel so much better? It's because my body learned, okay, our guts are sensitive right now, but we can gear up to eat breakfast. So do not underestimate the importance of circadian entrainment in any of these chronic diseases. Even in lupus, small cohorts receiving adjunctive probiotic supplementation display shifts in gut-derived metabolites alongside modest decreases in disease activity indices. What unites these outcomes is the capacity of diet microbiome interventions to recalibrate epithelial integrity, rein in pro-inflammatory cytokines, and modulate the HPA microglial axis. So that's your adrenal and autonomic nervous, if I'm reading that correctly. Yet genetics alone cannot explain who falls into chronicity and who recovers. Cohort studies consistently show that upwards of 70% of adults with IBD report at least one adverse childhood experience, physical abuse, household dysfunction, or early trauma. And this is what's caught. There's probably other components that might not be caught. For instance, like if you're low status or bullied at school or whatever, and that these exposures correlate with higher adult inflammatory markers and more severe flares. A recent mechanistic review lays out how early life stress leads to durable epigenetic reprogramming of cytokine genes and gut-brain signaling circuits, effectively raising the gain or inflammatory response throughout life. We knew this. Similar patterns have been observed in ulcerative colitis. That was another one that some of you were asking for. Cohorts exposed to childhood maltreatment, suggesting that psychosocial trauma fosters pro-inflammatory microbiome phenotype in pregnancy and beyond. So it can have happened to your mother before you were born, and it's not even something you personally experienced. If these environmental and psychosocial levers set the stage, mind-body therapies can help re-engage the system's native brakes. Inflammatory bowel disease patients randomized into mindfulness-based stress reduction or yoga show significant improvements in quality of life, anxiety, and stress scores that persist for months. Excuse me, we still have this is like peak allergy week. Hopefully, as we approach May, my allergies will go down. But until then, you'll have to just deal with me snorting and coughing. I'll keep it to a minimum. At some trials, even hint at modest reductions in disease activity. I can explain that too. Fibromyalgia studies of the Yoga of Awareness protocol demonstrate not only pain relief, but enhanced coping skills and fewer missed work days, while meta-analyses of mindful meditation for chronic pain reveal consistent, if small to moderate, effect sizes on pain intensity and depressive symptoms. This goes back to what I was talking about with psychedelics. This is mediated by your limbic system. Your limbic system will directly, so the gut-brain axis and the HPA axis will directly influence your inflammatory levels. So we're actually going to pursue that in just a second. Good Lord, sorry, I'm losing my ability to speak. Lupus patients engaging in stress reduction therapies, mindfulness, biofeedback, or gentle aerobic yoga report better perceived control, lower pain scores, and improved adherence to medical regimes. Taken together, these strands point towards a testable unifying model, early life psychosocial insults, tune, and this is not insults as in like, you're dumb. Insult is like something that was an insult to the system. Tune a susceptible genetic epigenetic backdrop towards pro-inflammatory microbiome, repeated barrier disruptions, then lock-in dysbiosis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let's get to, let's see how many sources it pulled. It looks like it pulled a lot of sources. 21 sources, so it's already doing a lot of research. Okay, this is unlocking a new unifying direction, which I think is the gut brain axis, not just the HPA axis. We've seen in other studies that gut dysfunction, dysbiosis, leaky gut, etc., can dramatically sensitize pain perception. Systemic inflammation alone can increase global perception of pain and fatigue, but moreover, the strictly sorry, let me move this. The strictly neurological pathways of trauma, depression, anxiety, and ADHD and their environmental genesis would also sensitize both the HPA axis as well as gut-brain axis via limbic activation. No. I am thinking there is a definitive two-way relationship between, trauma-mediated inflammation and the downstream, manifestations of multiple autoimmune disorders. All of the above, I suspect. Can you verify or refute? So to restate what I'm saying here in other terms is basically we have to look at not just the guts and the psychological impact. Let's look at the actual neurological, physiological impact that all of this has. It thought for 5 seconds and 12 sources. That was pretty fast. The evidence for two-way dialogue between trauma-driven neuroendocrine activation and gut-mediated inflammation is now overwhelming. Ta-da! Told you. Again, I have cheat mode enabled because I already knew all this, but it's citing its sources. Early chronic stressors, whether physical injury, emotional abuse, or neglect, initiate a sustained increase in corticotropin-releasing hormone, glucocorticoids, and sympathetic tone. Basically, catecholamines, adrenaline, and then sympathetic tone is your baseline upregulation. Those mediators alter intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut, and shift the microbial community towards pro-inflammatory species. So pro-inflammatory species is basically subclinical dysbiosis, where you end up with microbes in your gut that are basically ratcheting up your immune system. In turn, luminal products such as lipopolysaccharide and microbial metabolites cross the epithelium, engaging toll-like receptors on macrophages and dendritic cells. The cytokines they release, TNF, we actually talked about these earlier, TNF, IL-1 beta, and IL-6, feedback to the brain across at least 3 channels, vagal afferents. So vagus nerve is based on, that's the nerve that, one of the direct nerves that connects it, and your vagal tone is one of the primary mediators of your level of regulation. Transport across a compromised blood-brain barrier, BBB, and direct endocrine signaling via circumventricular organs. So that's going to be organs that are highly vascularized or near the heart. I'm not quite sure what that means. Once in the CNS, so CNS is central nervous system, so that's your brain and spinal cord. They prime microglia, sensitize nociceptive pathways. Nociception is your sense of your internal state. So nociceptive pain, and lower the threshold for anxiety, depression, and hypervigilance. This is also one of the reasons why hyperfocus is addictive to people that are neurospicy or have these things, is because the more you're focused on something outside of your body, the less you're feeling your body. So if you have weapons grade hyperfocus, this might be why. It's because your body feels so uncomfortable all the time that you don't want to be in your body. Conversely, dysbiosis and barrier breaches by themselves generate central effects. Animal models show that transplanting the microbiome of stressed mice into naive hosts reproduces anxiety-like behaviors and exaggerated HPA responses to acute challenge. So what this says is just changing your microbiome from healthy to imbalanced can cause anxiety alone. This is probably true for humans too. Human fMRI studies correlate altered gut-derived metabolite profiles, especially reduced short-chain fatty acids, with heightened amygdala activity and poorer fear extinction. Fear extinction is one of the primary things that you're looking for when you're trying to process anxiety or get rid of anxiety. Is your body basically gets stuck in a fear state. I actually had an online friend who described it the best, and she said anxiety is like when the boss music is playing, but there's no boss around. There's no boss to fight. Anxiety is you're always in the boss battle music mode. I know that's kind of downplaying it, but hey, we got to cope. Clinically, patients with inflammatory bowel disease or IBS frequently exhibit comorbid fibromyalgia type pain. I certainly did for a while there. Depression and cognitive fog, brain fog, yep, we all had that. Suggesting that peripheral inflammation alone is sufficient to remodel central circuits governing pain perception and mood, particularly when it's chronic. The longer you have some of these things, the more sensitized you become. At least that's many people's subjective experience. It also takes a long time to desensitize it. When we extend this framework to autoimmunity, trauma-primed inflammation appears to lower the activation threshold for self-reactive lymphocytes. Stress-induced microbiome shifts favor expansion of pathobionts, there's that word again, whose antigens cross-react with self-epitopes. I'm not sure what that means. I'm learning. Here we go. While sustained gut-derived cytokines bias naive T cells towards Th17 and Th1 phenotypes, both central to diseases like Crohn's and lupus, the very same cytokines perpetuate central sensitization and fatigue via microglial activation. So that's going back to fibromyalgia, and they blunt the HPA axis negative feedback sensitivity, locking the system in a feed-forward loop. No reputable review refutes this bidirectionality. Rather, the open questions concern the quantitative weight of each pathway. So the question is not whether, it's how important each pathway is. In IBS and fibromyalgia, neural sensitization may dominate. In IBD and lupus, mucosal barrier loss and innate immunity may initiate cascade, but still converge on the same gut-brain circuits. If you wish to test this hypothesis, I recommend a cross-disease cohort stratified by trauma history, while simultaneous measurements of gut permeability markers and so on and so forth. Okay, cool. This is good, but my instinct is that we're still missing some kind of keystone. Not necessarily a silver bullet, or perhaps we've identified the metabolic, immune, and neural pathways, but perhaps we simply need to develop a comprehensive network understanding, and that can be my thesis. Let me see if I can articulate what my intuition tells me. Let's say 1, predisposition and environmental factors. Genetics, epigenetics, childhood experiences, family, etc. Family, let's see, severe disease or injury. This both primes the patient for general high gain immune response, but the specific pathophysiological manifestation is generated by genetic predisposition, i.e., it will manifest as IBD or lupus or something else, depending on the patient. But rather, we should see these as a cluster of the same kind of syndrome. So number 2 would be centrality of the gut-brain axis, and therefore the centrality of gut health broadly, including microbiome, as this mediates or directly influences everything from the CNS to inflammation. In other words, this is a gut-centric pathological model. And then everything else radiates outwards from the gut-brain axis, sometimes creating potent feedback loops. HPA, neuroendocrine, gut immune, etc. Let's see. Then finally, this indicates the most robust treatment regimes would include multi-system breaking and reconditioning, such as targeted gut microbiome. Actually, let's just say gut interventions broadly. Probiotics, elimination diets, reducing zonulin, treating dysbiosis, high fiber, etc. So there's a lot of levers that you have. There are quite a few levers for the gut health. The second primary cluster of interventions has to do with limbic reconditioning via yoga, meditation, therapy, boundaries, probably EMDR, etc. Can you help me package this theory up and find either validation or refutation? That's good. All right, so here we are. Now, again, I'm not going to say I just solved autoimmune disease in a few messages with O4, but I'm going to send this over to some people afterwards and see what they think. But basically, from everything that I already knew, this all checks out. Your intuition that the heart of chronic inflammatory disease lies in a gut-centric network that radiates pathology through immune, metabolic, and neural channels is strongly supported by recent network medicine scholarship. Cool! I'm not the only one thinking this. Here's how your 4 points map onto the emerging evidence and where the gaps remain. Your first pillar, priming by predisposition and environment, is exactly the concept of a disease module in network medicine. Genetic and epigenetic variants set the baseline topology of immune barrier networks and early life adversities, ACE scores childhood illness. Imprint durable shifts in cytokine and neuroendocrine nodes. We knew that. Those shifts determine whether a later perturbation breaks only one pathway, such as IBD, or cascades through multiple axes, systemic autoimmunity, and lupus. Second, placing gut-brain axis at the model's core aligns with extensive reviews showing that microbiome-derived signals regulate both mucosal immunity and central sensitization. Dysbiosis and increased permeability, aka leaky gut, seed a network of TNF-alpha, IL-1 beta, and if I'm getting that wrong, I apologize. I don't actually know what those symbols mean. There's a lot that I don't know. IL-6 production that feeds back via vagal afferents and compromised blood-brain barriers to prime microglia and heighten pain and fatigue. Not just pain and fatigue, but anxiety and depression. Your third point, outward radiating feedback loops mirror graph theory analyses of microbial and host networks. Co-abundance networks studies reveal that key microbial hubs, SFCA, that's the short-chain fatty acid productions, anchor community resilience, while loss of these nodes correlates with colonic inflammation and altered CNS gene networks. Peripheral cytokine modules then couple HPA to autonomic circuits, creating positive feedback loops. So characteristics of chronicity, Finally, the multi-system breaking strategy you outline is precisely what network simulations predict. Interventions must target multiple high-degree nodes simultaneously. So basically, you're looking for central nodes and high-leverage interventions simultaneously to restore homeostasis. Diet microbiome levers, high-fiber targeted probiotics, zonulin antagonists, collapse inflammatory hubs, while mind-body therapies, yoga, meditation, EMDR, strengthen neural and endocrine breaks, synergistically decoupling the gut-brain feedback loop. No credible review refutes this holistic network gut-centric model. Instead, the open questions concerning quantifying each pathway's weight across diagnoses. Your thesis thus can be framed as chronic inflammatory diseases constitute a single network syndrome whose keystone is the gut-brain axis. The specific clinical phenotype, IBD, lupus, fibromyalgia, emerges from network topology shaped by genetic, epigenetic, and early life nodes. That actually sounds like a great thesis right there. To validate this theory, assemble a cross-disease cohort stratified by ACE scores, so on and so forth, everything that we've already talked. Excellent. Okay, so actually, no, that's done. I was just going to say, so as far as, research directions, this is valid. You get the idea. So this might seem overwhelming. That's fine. That is the process. I hope you got a lot out of this. This is how I'm using these tools. And this whole thing probably took like 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. I don't know. I'm not keeping track. Anyways, let me know if you have any questions. I hope that you learned a lot. Let me know if you want me to post this somewhere. There we go. Cheers.